Great, welcome back, everybody. We're in episode 11 of Boogie Nights finally, after a hiatus of, I think, over a month now. There was some like stuff happening, and yeah, so we had a little bit of a break, but we're completely back now, going hopefully back to our old schedule. Even though we're on a Wednesday now. So when and where we're going to do, next episodes and all that stuff is a little bit up in the air, but at least we're back today. And we're back with Evil, kind of on a continuation of our previous show where we talked about remakes. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that, comparing remakes to specifically knockoffs and all the various subgenres we can find in that. Welcome back.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. And you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good.
Great. Yeah, I'm really happy that you're back because I'm quite excited about this one. We had a little bit of a talk as we always do before, and yeah, it seems like this could be that has a lot of ins and outs, and I'm excited to get into. So I guess also because it kind of threw me off. Like it's probably best to define a little bit what a knockoff is, and you seem to have a good grasp on that. So yeah, let's talk about that, like the definition of a knockoff.
Well, it's a pretty like wide-ranging term.
Mm-hmm. Bless you, sir.
But for me, but for me, but for me,
Yeah.
what a knockoff kind of entails is you have a film that is very influential and does a lot of groundbreaking stuff, either in terms of cinematic form or structure or even narrative, and it becomes so popular that all of the other filmmakers want to try to do something like it. So the younger and experienced filmmakers will make films that borrow blatant elements from it and are heavily influenced. Um, you might have like B movie companies trying to cash in on the popularity of that by expanding it into its own kind of little genre, which has happened with several different things. I mean, spaghetti westerns, you could kind of call that as something that started off as just kind of a, because the broadest definition of it is just Italian western, but so much of, I guess, our perception of the spaghetti western is defined by Leone. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but also there's things like hagsploitation, which is kind of its own subgenre, even though it really just started as a series of knockoffs of the original Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and kind of the genre conventions it invented. Um, Slasher movies, to an extent, you could say started off as knockoffs and then
Mm.
developed into somewhat of a fully formed genre as later additions to it came in and kind of redefined it. And so uh, knockoffs, I guess, are interesting in that sense, in that they can lead to it becoming an entire genre if the original piece was groundbreaking enough,
Mm.
or it can
So,
make for just a nice bit of trivia, you
right.
know.
So
And
you've actually thrown the term hexploitation around before, I remember, and I'd never heard of it. And I'd like to, well, if you have any examples of films that fall under that genre, that maybe like define a little bit better what a hexploitation film
yeah,
is.
whatever happened to Baby Jane is the best example. That's like the first one, I believe. And what it is they're kind of like noirish horror type films, where they'll get like one or two aging starlets, women that were famous back in, maybe like the 30s or the 40s, and now they're older. So normally they would just get roles playing the mother or the grandmother or whatever. But with exploitation, instead they play a crazy person, and it's kind of like this. They have this kind of revolving plot of madness, and stuff like that. And Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is one of the best examples of it because it's one of the best films in that genre. It's one of the first, and it also had such interesting behind the scenes stories between the two lead actresses.
Right. So what's the story behind the scenes?
The two actresses actually hated each other. They hated each other in their characters hated each other in the movie. They played these two sisters. One of them was kind of this old washed up starlet that was kind of like a Shirley Temple, and then the
Right.
other sister actually went on to be a very well known like adult actress. And so the older sister got jealous, and something happened, and the one sister wound up getting crippled, and so the crazy unhinged sister has to take care of her, and it devolves into this whole thing of like abuse and just craziness.
Mm.
And the thing was, it starred Joan Crawford and Betty Davis, who were big actresses, and they despised each other behind the scenes. And I think a lot of that contributed to just the amount of tension and the drama you have in the film itself.
Right. Yeah, that always kind of works when life is kind of like imitating the art, I suppose. It kind of reminds me of, in a weird way, of that story from The Shining, where the lead actress was driven completely mad by Kubrick, and that definitely translates onto the
Not a
screen.
good pick in that movie, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
It it doesn't sound good.
no. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting that while we were talking, we mentioned a couple of films that like you would never suspect being knockoffs, like, and I guess they kind of fell under the subgenre of a homage, where I thought that like a homage usually sort of comes in the form of maybe a single shot or a sequence or something. But you mentioned Reservoir Dogs, which like I wouldn't suspect to even fall under any kind of unoriginality, I guess. But
Well, Quentin's been known for pastiching and slapping together different elements from different films to make his own work.
mm,
And Reservoir Dogs had numerous kind of comparisons as it was coming up. A big comparison was, of course, The Killing by Stanley Kubrick, which I don't know is necessarily fair. But the other one that is pretty fair is City on Fire, which
right,
was a 1987 Chow Yun-Fat film, pretty unremarkable. But Quentin Tarantino is a huge Chow Yun-Fat fan.
yeah,
In his early Reservoir Dog interviews, he talks about being a Chow Yun-Fat fan. At one point, I believe he actually wore the trench coat from one of his movies and like pretended, you know what I mean? So it, but the thing is, the City on Fire has some similar plot elements to Reservoir Dogs. There's an undercover police officer uh, who joins this bank heist that goes wrong, and some people get shot, and you know, and they wind up
there you
having a
go.
Mexican standoff at the end of it. You know, there's a whole lot of, and there are even similar shots within those sequences that are similar.
That would be, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then like I started sort of like thinking, and this is becoming sort of like general knowledge by now, but like that's Star Wars is actually hugely lifted from the Kurosawa films. So yeah, I mean that's kind of like a more well-known fact now. You also talking about A Fistful of Dollars, like going back to the spaghetti western.
Yes, and that's what's unique about A Fistful of Dollars.
Mm-hmm.
It itself is an unauthorized remake of Yojimbo, but the only difference is they put it in the West.
Right.
And the plot is so like the plot beats are so similar that Kurosawa actually won a lawsuit against him. And he went on to later remark that he made more money off of A Fistful of Dollars than he did actually making Yojimbo.
That is
How
awesome.
big that movie became. And so that's an interesting instance of somewhere in the knockoff remake territory actually spawning a whole genre out from
Right.
under it. You know, revitalizing the westerns and bringing a new chapter into that genre. Um,
Well, that's kind of what you are saying about like a knockoff says more about the film it's knocking off, basically. Like, besides being a film in its own right, it says so much about the film it's trying to emulate or
Yeah.
even trying to redo.
Yeah, and that's that was originally how I had the idea of framing this was, as a filmmaker, if you had the choice between one or the other, which would you prefer to make a film that's like so influential everybody knocks it off? You
Right.
have a whole genre of knockoffs based off of this movie, or would you rather have a film that's like so successful it gets remade every 10 years?
I
Both
think I
in a
think
way are signs of success. They're both kind of achievements that I
hmm.
think any director would like to have, but in a sense, they're also not. They're not always that good.
No, but I guess it's kind of funny. So like I think I have two thoughts on that. Like as a filmmaker, I think personally I would prefer to see loads of knockoffs of my film because it's free publicity, basically, and it's more than like just one remake every 10 years, you know?
Yeah,
And on the other hand, like let's say like for instance, like I come from a music background and was in various bands. There's this huge thing that like if you are the lead act of the show, you want to have your opening band to be as crappy as possible because you look good in comparison, you know? So I think that would apply the same way to a knockoff. Like if the knockoff is better than your film, you know, let's say that just purely on visual style, that they do a better job lighting the scenes and stuff, that would reflect pretty bad on you, you know?
but not always because, like I mentioned originally, if your film is very influential and it does a lot of new things, and then somebody else comes around and does a lot of those same new things but twists them up in a way that kind of redefines it, I think you go then from having a series of knockoffs to actually having your own subgenre
Right.
on your hands.
Mm.
Because I mean, when you look at slashers, the big films they talk about are Halloween, Friday the 13th, and then Nightmare on Elm Street, and how
Right.
each of them went to kind of redefine the genre as it developed.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Do you think that the individual filmmakers had any benefits though to creating that subgenre, or was it just because you know because they created it?
I don't know. I don't know what kind of benefits or anything. It all depends on the popularity of it at the time. Bubbles happen,
Sure.
and if you can take advantage of it, go ahead. I just like to look at it more as kind of an interesting film evolution,
Right.
how different genres evolve over time, and to go back and look and say, okay, this is what invented it.
Hmm.
These are the precursors. This is what started the genre. This is what developed the genre. And in some cases, knockoffs can be a big part of that.
Right.
And in some cases, it's not an actual narrative element. I mean, we've been focusing a lot on that, but sometimes it's just a structural element, like
Hmm.
the idea of a shared universe.
Right.
That's a Marvel idea that they came up with and they pulled off. And so you could say that all of the other studios trying to do shared universes are knocking off the Marvel model.
Hmm.
It's not that noticeable because the only thing about it is that you're linking franchises together. It's not, you can be completely different in terms of content and still be kind of a knockoff in that sense.
Sure. I mean, with the comic book film, it's sort of like a given that they're going to do it because the comic books themselves have shared universes. So it has to happen basically.
Well, but I mean
The reason,
that wasn't always the case. I mean, we had the Batman films and we had the Superman films and we had the
hmm,
Spider-Man and the X-Men films before Marvel. I mean, the only
sure.
person I've known that's come close to doing a shared universe was Kevin Smith
Oh
with
yeah.
uh, with the universe and how different characters would pop back up in movies, kind of expanding the world that was in there. And
Right.
you can also say Tarantino, to an extent, has a shared universe in his movies.
He does a little bit, doesn't he? Yeah.
I mean,
He's
it's a
got
pretty
those.
much accepted fan theory, I would say.
Hmm. No, I mean he's got that the Vega brothers bit basically. Unfortunately, we'll probably never see see the Vega brothers, but because he's been working on it, like I've heard about it like 10 years ago, and it's still not made. But
well, wasn't John Travolta originally supposed to be the Mads Mikkelsen character from Pulp Fiction
yeah,
and from Reservoir Dogs? But Mads Mikkelsen was so crazy or something that Quentin Tarantino didn't want to work with him again.
no, like Michael Madsen, yeah, and I think the reason was that John Travolta wasn't available or something. There was a reason why Michael Madsen got the role, and then later on he sort of figured out, oh, I want to make a film called The Vega Brothers, which sounds already great. But then the problem was that because they both die in their own timelines, it wouldn't quite work. And then he said like, oh, and then I heard a song on the radio which gave me this idea how it could work. But then, you know, he's so focused on like making every genre now.
Kind of did the Vega brothers with Dusk Till Dawn, you know, even though he
Kind
didn't
of.
direct the film, they had a similar kind of dynamic.
Right.
Within the universe, the connections don't stop there. A popular fan theory is that what's in the briefcase is the diamonds from Reservoir Dogs.
Right.
Meaning that Mr. Pink did manage to escape, sell the diamonds, and is now rich on an island somewhere.
There you go.
So.
What I said, or my reason for saying sort of the benefit for the filmmaker, because I recently, obviously Wes Craven was in the news quite a bit, and I saw this video on him, there was a documentary on the Scream franchise, basically, and where he basically proclaims that he never really wanted to make horror films. That wasn't written for as a filmmaker, but because that subgenre got created with, you know, that kind of slasher bubble, he couldn't really escape it. Nobody would give him money for anything else. So in a way, it's kind of also, yeah, he shot himself in the foot a little bit, you know?
Yeah, like, but I mean, he was really good before he did horror films. I mean, before he did slasher films, rather. I mean, he did, what was it? Last House on the Left was him, wasn't it?
Right.
And he also did The Hills Have Eyes.
There you go.
Which is absolutely terrifying. The remake was garbage, but the original was pretty good. So, I mean, he already had some really good bona fide horror masterpieces under his belt before he even touched slasher films.
Right. So back to sort of the original or the sort of underlying question here, like, which one would you prefer? Would you rather have a remake or knockoff of any of your films?
Well, and that's a tough question.
Yeah.
And that's what I was wondering about. Because the knockoffs, I think, is definitely it's a bit of a legacy status to know that you've influenced that many other filmmakers in the genre. But then again, depending on what kind of licenses you were able to negotiate with the original film, remakes could be a far more lucrative option for you.
Right. Yeah, because that was the question, like whether or not the people that do a remake actually benefit financially from it because of the licensing and all that stuff.
I think it depends vastly on what their contracts were. Like, I gotta think Sam Raimi, I gotta think he made money off the Evil Dead remake.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it? It's like that's sort of like the genius of George Lucas, basically, where he said like he would take a lesser salary, but he wanted to have like basically a cut of all the merchandise, or maybe even he
he made so much bank off of that idea.
I know.
Because merchandising wasn't seen as that popular of a thing. Like, that's the thing. That was one of his biggest accomplishments in a way, was that he invented the idea of merchandising. You know? And him doing that, and then Spielberg doing Jaws, were kind of set the stage for how blockbusters are today in a way.
Right.
So you can kind of trace them back to those two concepts.
Right. Yeah, and that sort of brings us to the other subgenre, which like where my confusion basically started when I started researching the idea of knockoffs, because I couldn't really come up with anything except for some memories that I had as a child, that I used to go into the movie theater and see two posters for basically the same film, but with a different title. And
those are kind of copycats though, because they do those like every few years. Like they had the White House Down and
Mm-hmm.
the Operation Black Hawk Vengeance something or other, and
Right.
then before that they had the two volcano movies. They had the two asteroid movies. They had the two. That seems to be a weird thing that happens there. Oh,
Yeah.
I've actually heard what that is. I think it's like they'll like one studio will find out the other one is developing it, and
Mm.
they will try to push theirs out before the other studio develops theirs. That
Right.
way they look like the original and the other one looks like the copycat, and they're able to scoop up all that money.
Right.
The weird
Yeah,
thing is,
that's actually quite an interesting story. As I always say, my favorite film is Doctor Strangelove, and it was based upon a book called Red Alert, I believe. And there was a film made that was actually supposed to finish before Doctor Strangelove. That was the exact same storyline, but Kubrick managed to be very angry and stop that release so that he could release first. But where I was sort of like getting to was the idea of the mockbuster.
yeah, that didn't
So,
always work out for Kubrick though.
sorry?
'Cause didn't he get screwed over on Napoleon with that?
Oh, that's
Like
very possible.
developing Napoleon, and he was developing it, and then another kind of similar movie came out, flopped, and he lost all the investment for it.
Right.
So he's gotten beaten to the punch as well over time.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you play for stakes high enough, you will
Yeah,
always like lose out every once
especially
in a
with
while.
how much development he put into those projects, man. He
Yeah.
had like libraries of Napoleon stuff.
No, like I think we talked about this before. There's a documentary called Boxes where like he went as far as like I'm gonna geek out on Kubrick for a second, but he went as far as designing his own box because he didn't quite like the feel and size of anything he could buy at the paper store. So he had this whole design of like a cardboard box that he wanted and had those made just to store the Napoleon research. And there's supposedly somewhere there's a warehouse with all these boxes in there,
Yeah.
and it's big.
And didn't they build an entire like mock village too?
Oh, probably, yeah. Yeah. I mean, like the way he builds sets is usually
Well, and he
big.
came up with some pretty innovative ideas. For extras, he had this idea of using paper uniforms, I think, which allowed them to cut costs significantly since he was having these gigantic battle sequences with thousands of people in them.
Right.
So, like, 200 guys back, nobody can tell the difference between a paper uniform and a regular uniform. It's kind of like theater
Mm.
tactics that work in, using the camera.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this all in a time where, visual effects wasn't at its peak,
Yeah. And apparently the Napoleon movie was like a lot of it was going to be like him as a young bachelor, like hitting up all the hot young Parisian women of France.
Mm.
There was a lot of like weird stuff in it that had nothing to do with like the common stuff you'd see in a Napoleon movie.
Well, I mean, yeah, you would expect it to take a weird turn with him, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. No, and then like um kind of like back to I guess the mockbuster, but also we talked a little bit about like you said Pearl Harbor being a knockoff from Titanic, and that was quite interesting.
I mean, quite a few people have pointed that out already, so I wouldn't be the first to say it. But
Hmm.
there's a common theory out there that yeah, Pearl Harbor was just kind of it was a cash in to kind of capitalize on that kind of the idea that kind of like these big disaster romance movies are popular, the way Titanic had, because
Right.
Titanic had made so much money they had to see, can we get a cut of this? And so they did a much kind
Hmm.
of they did a version that wasn't as good, I guess you could say, in Pearl Harbor, but
Right.
it had a lot of the same elements. The fact that it's a real life historical tragedy, but they insert fictional characters for the purpose of inserting this romance in the middle of the disaster.
Right. So yeah, like the knockoff culture done. That was a question that we were kind of like proposing. Like, is it something that is that was like more of a 90s thing? Is it something that is still there now that we are more in sort of the remake era?
Well, no. Well, what I was wondering about it is because you used to have like these big trends where you have a bunch of movies that come out and they'd be very similar to the previous one. And I guess you could say that with some of the superhero movies in like the early 2000s. I've seen videos that kind of show how they all kind of run on similar themes. But I was wondering because so much of the knockoff is, young, inexperienced filmmakers making like their first or their second film and borrowing heavily from that original movie, or trying to, the thing becomes a hot kind of genre piece. Everybody wants to see movies like it. So a bunch of very small companies start cranking out movies that are very similar to it. Uh, what I'm wondering is that now we're in the internet and now we have YouTube and now you can just make a 10-minute parody instead of trying to get $100,000 to make a movie that's not going to be as good as the other one no matter what. You know, it it seems like we might be shifting away from that trend of having these kind of big knockoffs of very original kind of dynamic films.
Right.
But then again, that could also factor into what kind of films are being made today. We don't have a whole lot of like super original, unique content coming out.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like I'm also thinking about like the film that I've made last year, and like how the rent. Like I had ideas, but when I some back, like a lot of that stuff, because it was a detective film, but a lot of that stuff could be seen as lifted from old James Bond films and stuff, and it isn't that was like necessarily trying to remake or knock that stuff off, but it's just that that's what inspired me, and given sort of the budget challenges, that's what I could do. So it's probably pretty difficult to write something very original, and similarly to the script I'm writing now, like I already told you, like it's very Fellini-like. That's the first thing I said to myself. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably nothing, close to the genius of Fellini, but like it's definitely heavily borrowing from that kind of style.
Yeah.
So
Well, and writers today are kind of encouraged to think in that way.
hmm
There's this whole idea of your movie is only as good as how you can pitch it in 24 words or less on the time it takes to get off an elevator,
right.
which I think is a pretty antiquated notion. But what are you going to do? You still need it for film festival submissions and stuff. But uh, a lot of that kind of stuff is like they kind of actively encourage you to try to put the film into a box like that of, oh, it's this and this.
Right.
Try to, and I don't know if that's just the increased reliance on marketing that we've come to depend on for profits or what.
Well, I would say, because I've actually seen the literal version of elevator pitches last year at the London Screenwriting Festival. They actually, because it's hosted at a university, and they have an elevator there that takes about 90 seconds to go up and down. And they actually do the literal version of the elevator pitch in there. And I think it's because when you look at the queue and when you look at the amount of writers present at a screenwriting festival, you start to see like, oh, maybe there's something to an elevator pitch, because how else are you going to manage 1,000 writers trying to sell you their idea?
I don't know. Maybe develop a way where you can more adequately review every single one of the 1,000 writers.
Yeah. But that there's going to be a lot of time that you need to invest in that, like that's that's kind of the problem, so I guess, with this sort of modern world where anybody can become a writer. All you have to do is go sit at Starbucks with a laptop and you're done, like
Well, I think I don't. I feel that might be a little pejorative towards kind of today's generation, because I feel that was always kind of the case. There was the idea of, oh, we'll move out to California and I'll buy a typewriter and I'll be a writer.
mm-hmm.
That kind of cliche has been around for a long time, I think. I don't
Right.
think it's unique to this generation. What is unique, though, is the idea that it's not location based anymore. It's not I have to move somewhere. I just have to go down the street, and I don't have to buy a $3,000 piece of equipment. I've got a computer here already, and I just use that. So
Right.
that definitely shows that there's an increased availability. A decreased barrier for entry. So, but you still need skills to rise above the crowd. You still have to
Oh,
have,
absolutely.
so.
No, I mean, for every 100 film scripts that are written, 99% of them like are just sort of like bottom of the barrel kind of stuff. And yeah, if the film even gets made, like even making a film these days is easy enough, because what do you really need? Like a camera, kind of everybody has that these days, with a bit of a lens on it, like a DSLR camera. Like films are shot on that, but like so many of them are also not seen, which is something that like I'm becoming increasingly aware of with the Indie Boogie site. It's great. Like, we are approaching, I think we are over 1,000 film submissions now, but when I look at the view counts on YouTube and Vimeo, they're low, the good ones.
Well, it's a big market,
Yeah.
and that's why that's why nowadays filmmakers very much have to be their own kind of marketers at the same time. Those skills are just as valuable as knowing how to work a camera or deal with actors today. Because, like you're saying, that can make or break being able to reach out and grab people and get them interested. Oh,
right. I guess the question concerning like the topic of like knockoffs and what we've discussed in the past with remakes is the idea pool infinite, or is it like the longer that the human race or the filmmaking race exists, the less become available, which is something very similarly to questions I had with music a long time ago. Like, is the infinite? Like, is there always going to be a fresh idea out there, or is it just going to slowly whittle down to everything's been done?
there are always new ways to combine things, and especially with again, with the decreased barrier for entry, you have whole new groups of people that are entering the industry that have never been part of it before. And because of that, you have entirely new perspectives being introduced. And with new perspectives will come new ideas and new ways to tell stories and new types of stories, even new genres entirely.
Right.
So that kind of complaint of we're running out of ideas has been around since the ancient Greeks, and we still managed to keep ourselves entertained. I mean, you got to remember that most everybody, unfortunately, is not a huge film historian. A lot of people, when you ask their top five, you won't see a single film from before they were born. So there's a lot of untapped audience potential out there. It's just knowing how to utilize it. And maybe that speaks something to the kind of the postmodernist element today. We're just being able to reference older films that people don't know can be very entertaining in and of itself, because it creates kind of this almost trivia puzzle game for people.
Right. Well, for people that have the interest to actually, because like in the end, film, like for the masses, is still an entertainment thing and not so much a puzzle to solve.
Yeah, but some film has the potential to give a really emotional experience with it. And if there's a film that really connects with you, you naturally want to learn more about it.
Right. So it'd be interesting if they started like maybe I don't know actually if they're already doing that, but to take films from like the way back, like the Great Train Robbery and that kind of stuff, or the silent films and stuff, and bring those into the modern era, just to educate people about the history of film,
Well, there are plenty of documentaries and TV shows out there that kind of go over that history.
Hmm.
There was a really one that I saw that went over like the history of European cinema,
Right.
specific throughout the silent era, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened in the silent era that you really don't learn too much about.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example for that?
Oh boy. Well, in several documentaries have been made that explore different perspectives of minority groups in cinema. There have been ones that talk about the Black experience and the Latino experience and the Asian experience and the gay experience. And what's interesting is how different uh, they're differently portrayed throughout time and how that changes over time, the way groups are seen. Uh, One point that I believe I remember, and I might have to check on this, was that in the silent era there was a little bit more freedom for African Americans as actors and directors before the advent of sound came in. I think it was right around the time that it might have been during the advent of sound, or like right around the time of Birth of a Nation. But there was a turn that happened somewhere in there, and they kind of wound up being relegated to stereotypical roles when they
Right.
were completely independent. But there was a
Mm.
time when they were actually able to get directorial positions. And I believe there was one I remember where he was, what was it? Oh man, I might have messed this whole story up. Call me on this.
Well, I mean, we can always.
Well, because there was an actor that was famous back then, and he was like half Native American and half black.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a whole bunch of films, you know, being this guy and capitalizing off of that. And he was a real popular socialite. But they only thought he was one half of those things, and then they found out he was the other half, and he got excommunicated completely.
I know.
He wound up like never working again. I
Right.
can't remember which one it was though, and that's what's making me angry.
Well, don't get angry. That's fine. We can always like come back to that on the next one.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how the technology, because you said like it had something to do with the invention of sound in films, and I believe that women in film, like especially in the post production section, that also changed when it was editing silent film. Those editors were primarily women, and then when sound got invented, it became an electrical thing instead of just a purely sort of like a visual strip. And then with the electrical bit of sound, all of a sudden it became like a very male dominated, because now it's like technology. And like I found that always a very strange way of looking at things,
Yeah.
especially because like sound is a strip, like film, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have any other points to cover when it comes to the topic? I'm kind of
Uh,
like through my notes here.
did either of us actually answer the question as to which we'd prefer?
Well, I did. Like I was actually quite quick to say I would probably prefer getting more knockoffs than having one remake every 10 years or even every 5 years, because the knockoffs have the potential of generating more. Because like if one person knocks off your film, probably two people do it, and that
Yeah.
means probably five people do it. So I'm just looking to play the numbers there.
Well, I mean, and it usually only happens to like the really big influential films. Like The Exorcist had a lot of knockoffs that came after it. Pulp Fiction had a lot of knockoffs that came after it. So
Mm.
they've, they've had that kind of thing happen with them. So it definitely is a signal of things. But then again, there's also like, I guess it depends on what type of remake it is, because there are some films also that are like they've become like such cultural touchstones. Like the stories are so ingrained in the society that it almost becomes like part of the public, and it winds up getting remade for each generation. Like the story of the 47 Ronin is a great example, or you could even say Zorro for a while. Zorro had a lot of remakes.
Right.
They had like 5 or 6 remakes before color even came in.
Right.
So
TV show and yeah.
I guess I'd go with knockoffs.
Yeah. No, I think I'd take it as an honor. I think I'd take a knockoff more as an honor than a remake. A remake seems more like a cash in, whereas a knockoff seems more like it will always be a little bit of a homage, basically, to
Yeah,
your work.
there's definitely an element of homage in the knockoffs, most of them at least. But
Hmm.
there is also a thing with there's also a thing with remakes that I think the idea of them is very tainted by what's going on today with remakes that are very
Hmm.
shallow and cash based. But there was a history of remakes being done for very passionate creative reasons. I mean, the Thing and The Fly from the '80s are both fantastic practical effects horror movies, really, classic movies, and they were both remakes to
Really?
really old 50 films that the creators really love. So if we were talking remakes, that could also be a remake. Is you make a film that's popular, and then 50 years later, some whippersnapper comes in and remakes it into one of the most classic films. And so now every time they watch that movie, they have to go back and watch your movies. So you're kind of like you get to piggyback on that one's success afterwards. You get double success.
Wow. It always surprises me, like how much we don't know. Like I never suspect The Fly to be a remake. Like, and it's
You
one
didn't
of
know
my
The
favorite
Fly was a
films. Sorry?
You didn't know The Fly was a remake? David Cronenberg's The Fly?
No, no, never heard of that.
Yeah, it was a 1950s film. And in the 50s
Wow.
film, when the guy swapped things with the fly, there was like a little fly with a human head that was like flying around that they had to catch. And then there was a giant man with a fly pincer and a giant fly head that was walking around that they had to try to wrangle.
Yeah, I'm 100% going to watch that.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe not alone. Like if it's anything like the original, well, not the original. If it's anything like the remake, like Cronenberg's version, then I won't watch it alone, I think.
It's probably a bit more camp because of how old it is. But
Yeah,
you
but
know
Camp doesn't.
from another world with it, since that's the original movie that the thing was based on.
Yeah, Camp doesn't necessarily make it less shocking or scary.
I think it's more of a sad horror movie from what I remember.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. All right. I'm trying to think if I have any other thoughts on the idea of knockoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
that's the thing is, it's really easy to turn your nose up at the remake, but there's a lot of like remake, especially if
mhm.
you have control of certain licenses and you can orchestrate the remake. Then you just get then you make money. There, there's a whole bunch of different reasons.
Right.
Not all of them would be artistic though, and so that is the thing. The knockoff is definitely the high road to take, but
Right. Yeah, no, that's what I'm actually sort of like taking away from this is that like the term knockoff sounds a lot worse than the term
it's
remake.
a pejorative term, knockoff.
Yeah.
Remake is kind of a neutral term that's, you know, some people use it pejoratively. They don't like the idea of remakes, but it's still kind of a neutral term.
Hmm.
But knockoff is almost always used in a pejorative term. Homage would be the polite term for it.
Right. But I think homage when you're talking about an entire film, homage isn't the right word, like that's
It doesn't necessarily knockoffs aren't necessarily the entire film. Like
oh
in a lot
okay.
of Exorcist knockoffs, they're very different from the original because they'll make the possessed person a grown woman so that
Hmm.
when she gets possessed, they can have lots of sex scenes. So they're, they may borrow a lot of the same beats, but they're not the same movie.
Right.
They're a remake is the same movie depending on how it's done.
Hmm.
So, so that's the difference there. The knockoffs, they're just kind of stealing the best parts from your movie and then doing a worse job at performing them. Unless it's one of the people that's really good at it, in which case you know, like we said, it could turn into a whole subgenre. It could evolve from there. But
Right.
that all depends on, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like even after the last time that we talked and we had an entire show about remakes, like that world is just becoming worse and worse. We had the recent explosion around Fantastic Four.
Man, that got
Like
so much hate. Yeah.
yeah, not only the film, but this time it was like directly on the director as well. Because he didn't take responsibility. And I still don't know what I think about it. Like about his.
I mean, you don't think the studio is being crazy?
No, obviously the studio is being crazy, but like that doesn't mean that your accountability as a director falls away. I mean,
Oh
it's
yeah, of
still
course not. But I mean, there are tons of horror stories out there about how the director has the movie, and then the studio completely like, you know, fucks him over.
right.
Like what
But I
was
mean,
one of the Alien movies that was directed by which one of those was it? Alien 3 or Alien 4?
it's probably the one where it wasn't about like Ripley anymore, but the other girl,
Maybe.
like Resurrection or something.
I think it might have been 3. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. It was the one that was directed by a really famous guy. And it was like, wow, that was.
Well, aren't they all?
Oh yeah, it was Alien 3. It was directed by David Fincher,
Oh, whoa.
and that movie was a total train wreck.
Right.
And he went on to do great stuff. I a lot of people I think the more nuanced opinion is the idea that there are no buffer movies anymore.
Right.
And it used to be directors would go from a $2 million movie to a 10 million to a 50 million, and they'd work their way up to the big 200 million. So they knew how to handle that kind of crew and budget.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So that's a lot of common wisdom, is that he didn't know how to handle it, or he didn't know how to deal with the studio, and it
But,
caused too much kind of crap. But also, that studio's been known for mucking about and
oh,
doing
is it?
crazy stuff.
Right.
So I personally wonder how much of it is the studios doing. I really don't trust them to begin with. So
No, that's fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, how did dogs do? Like, what was it? Like his dogs did like $100,000 damage to a hotel room, I think, or it was.
Yeah, something like that. And
Yeah,
he
it
he
was
hit he hit
some
on
crazy
set.
but
But yeah. Mhm. No, I'm just like hoping that this will put some question marks in the studio's lab, where if you're going to go the remake route and you're going to do all these things, maybe treat it with a bit more respect, because
I
the
don't think
Fantastic
people
Four
are.
has a potential. Like
I
Fantastic Four has a real potential, but yeah.
I really don't see him learning that lesson though. I mean, this is
No.
the third Fantastic Four film we've had that hasn't worked. I mean,
Uh,
the first time they fucked this up,
mm-hmm.
you know. So it's kind of they. I see it as a bubble, and I think eventually, like, there's gonna have to be a few movies that fail at once, or possibly like one or two Marvel movies that really fail. I
Right.
think if Marvel really failed, I think that could crash it, because I think that's the goodwill that everybody's riding on.
But the thing is, Marvel treats its properties with a certain type of respect,
They
like,
do, yeah, and that's the thing. See, everybody has this trust that Marvel has built up because they've kind of, you know, they haven't steered anything wrong yet. Everything's been pretty good. Even the
yeah,
bad movies have been okay, I guess. You know, and
yeah.
so people they're willing to trust Marvel a lot more than they are any other studio right now. So I think if
Mm,
Marvel were to fail, if they had like if Civil War were to tank, or if the Age of Ultron were to not the Thanos, the Infinity Crisis,
right.
I
Infinity
think if
Wars,
that
yeah.
were to tank, I think that could crash it. But there's no
Mm.
way to tell how how that would happen, or you know, because
Well,
we're definitely starting to see signs of fatigue develop, and people are talking about it all over.
yeah. No, I mean,
Uh,
I'm getting a bit tired of the Marvel universe. Like, I don't like a lot of characters in it, basically. You know, like, and I don't actually really know what I like about the films. They're just entertaining. I don't even like maybe any of the characters, to be honest.
Well, and see, the thing with the comics is that they've had so much time and they've had hundreds of, characters. They have a whole universe there. So you don't have to like the 10 most popular characters. You could still find like 4 or 5 crazy characters out there that you love and you can follow them.
Right.
You don't necessarily have that with the movies because they're all tied in together.
That's it.
You kind of have to like all of them for all of them to work.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I was getting a bit like tired with the last one, the Age of Ultron, but then I really liked the way that they dealt with Ultron and the way that they dealt with his development from being born basically to his whole thought process that was explained, and I liked that so much that I forgave the entire film. You know.
Yeah.
So
I
like,
had a similar thing with Guardians of the Galaxy where I was going through it and I was like, is this good? Is this? And then I think they got towards the end and the ending, it just kind of all came together and it was like, yeah, this is good. I
yeah,
like it.
yeah, they have a certain quality still to them where they can just do
They
it.
know how to do it.
Yep.
And it's weird because you go to behind the scenes stuff and you don't hear them much, but I've heard that there's not a lot of creative freedom. Like they're very like everything's very much kept in check, and up until very recently they had a committee that kind of oversaw everything, and apparently they're integrating more so that doesn't happen and they all go to one guy instead of so
Right.
I don't know. Well, see, that's the thing. Everybody says they're fatigued about it, but we're still excited about every movie you mention. It's like, okay, yeah,
Mm.
we're fatigued, but Black Panther, I'm gonna see that.
Yep.
Shazam, I'm gonna see that.
Hmm.
Every one of them, you're like, yeah, but I still kind of want to see that. That'll be fun. And so we have to have like there's got to be one that everyone looks forward to that really tanks hard
Mm.
to crash it. I think, and I don't think that might be the thing that has to happen. I don't know.
Yeah,
Because it seems like every other studio can fail, and as long as Marvel's doing good, it seems to keep rolling.
yeah, and I do have very high hopes for DC as well. Like what I absolutely loved, I got chills when I learned about it. Everybody was hating on the last Superman and like how he destroyed the entire city and basically killed more people than he saved or something, you know? And there was like a big discussions about that. And then they came right out of left field with the Batman v Superman, where they actually put him on trial for that.
I
And I
know,
was
and
just like,
they show him say, I
genius.
thought that was yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And
Like,
I don't know, a lot of people hate on Zack Snyder, and I can see why. I mean, Sucker Punch was pretty horrible, but he's done some okay movies. You know,
what has he done?
he did 300. He did The Watchmen.
Oh, Watchmen, yeah.
He did Sucker Punch.
Hmm.
Um, did he do anything else that was pretty big?
Doesn't Suicide Squad he's doing, executive
Yeah, well,
producer.
that's the one that's coming up. Well, no, and he's actually also doing he's doing Batman v Superman, I think.
Yep.
Also his.
Yeah, that's directing. Yep. Man of Steel he did. Yeah, okay.
Oh yeah, Man of Steel he did.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Dawn of the Dead.
Yes, that was what brought him on the map was Dawn, and that set off the whole zombie.
Hmm.
That kind of that and because I think that and Shaun of the Dead came out around the same time, didn't they? They were like early 2000s,
Right.
and that kind of set off the zombie trend that still hasn't quieted down since.
No, no, no. But yeah, it works, and you have a lot of flexibility with the zombies because you can make them slow, you can make them fast, you can make them funny. You know, like.
There's been a whole lot of like rumination on it.
Mm. So, if you had to choose, which film would you knock off?
What film would I knock off?
Yeah.
I haven't seen any good films worth knocking off lately. Um, although, like some of like the lawn shot techniques in Birdman, I really liked,
Hmm.
and the way that the plot developed in Nightcrawler, I like that. And then also like almost anything Japanese new wave, I'm absolutely in love with, especially their camera techniques. I'll freely knock those off.
Right.
As far as remakes, there's one film that I recently saw that I would be interested in remaking. I'm actually doing a review of it. It's The Possession of Joel Delaney.
Okay.
It actually came out a year before The Exorcist, and it's about this rich kid that gets possessed by the spirit of this poor Puerto Rican kid that he was a friend with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of slow for me, and there are people that really like it, and it's got some really interesting scenes towards the end of the movie, especially the very ending. I really enjoyed, although it's pretty controversial.
Mm.
But what I liked about it was the concept of this rich person being possessed not by the devil but by a poor person, and having that kind of class struggle play out directly in the form of a possession. And and that's one of the reasons I wasn't a big fan of the movies. I felt they could have gone farther on that topic. They really explored on the end of the movie, but I felt they could have delved more into it.
Right.
Aside from just kind of showing the differences in the backgrounds. There's a very strict kind of contrast in that sense. In scenery, you see a very big contrast, but they don't delve into it too much thematically. It's kind of balanced between that and this debate between science and religion, and I wasn't a big fan of that part of the movie.
Right.
I felt it undermined the other part. But I think that would be perfect for today. What you do is you call it affluenza, and it'd be about this rich kid that runs over a bunch of people drunk driving after stealing alcohol, and he gets off on the court case, doesn't face any time because he uses a bullshit legal defense, and then he gets possessed by one of the people that he killed in the car accident, and so now he has to. And I think there could be some interesting stuff there, especially if we don't like the kid. There are some interesting ways you can play on that, especially with how the family reacts to it and everything.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Huh. Yeah, I think myself, I've been trying for the best I can to kind of like capture a bit of like the Fellini spirit, because I'd really like to make a film like that where it sort of sits in between. He's been said to be sort of the inventor of the mockumentary because he kind of puts himself into the film.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something I've always kind of like tried to.
Well, and his films are also very autobiographical as well.
That's it, yeah. And yeah, I'd like to make something like that, like having sort of made a sort of straight. It wasn't an entirely straight story, the Ipanema File, but it was. It was yeah, just basically a detective story with a weird twist in it, but yeah, I'd like to do something like that where I put more of myself into it, like Fellini did. Another thing, like, because I really like the vibe of his films, like if you take La Strada, which is one of my favorites as well, there's not many signs that is very autobiographical, but there's a very clear sense of vibe and feeling in that film that I really like. And I would love to make something like that. And yeah, that could be considered a knockoff. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. The thing with Fellini though is like 8.5 was kind of his midlife crisis film, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So you got to save that one for later on. That's like your halfway through movie.
How old do you need to be for a midlife crisis?
It's typically between 30 and 40, I believe.
Oh, well, then, like, I'm 33. Like, I can do it.
You're almost there.
Yeah, no. I'd like to avoid the midlife crisis.
Well, that's kind of what 8.5 was all about, though, was the midlife crisis. Because it's him having director's block, which is a term that I've never seen used anywhere else but in reference to that movie.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I recently watched Intervista, which was just like a film about him making a film and being interviewed while making a film or something. It just has all these sort of weird layers in it that, like, yeah, I haven't seen anything done like that before. I kind of like I saw this film with I think it was Scarlett Johansson like a couple of maybe last year it was or something called Under the Skin, and I
Oh,
felt like
the Alien.
yeah, I felt that was like trying to borrow a lot from sort of Fellini style, but it failed miserably, and I hated that film with a passion.
Well, there's a lot of films that do that kind of slow pace. Beyond the Black Rainbow,
Okay.
that does that kind of very slow kind of ambiance pace.
Mm.
It's also kind of a Taxi Driver influence, you could say as well. Um,
Right.
maybe more so than Fellini, but I haven't seen that much Fellini. So, um,
Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. Like City of Women, the Knights of can't remember what it's called. It's all in Italian, you know. I also watch all that stuff without subtitles, so like for the half part, I don't even know what it's really about. But you know, yeah,
yeah, well, the conversation kind of meander in some of them anyway. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've kind of reached the end of this topic. I don't know if you have anything else to add to this.
no, I'm good.
Great. Let's get some promotion out of the way.
Perfect. Yeah, you can find me Evil Antonio on Twitter, or the Evil Antonio on Facebook, or just search Evil Antonio on YouTube. Me as
Great.
well.
Yeah. Your YouTube is What Sounds Best, was it?
Yeah,
Yeah. Great.
and there will be a link in the description, I think. So,
If you are a filmmaker and especially an independent filmmaker and you want to get more promotion towards your films and yourself as a filmmaker, I'd highly suggest you sign up for our website indieboogie.com, which helps independent filmmakers promote themselves and connect with each other. And you can find us on Twitter at Fighting Badgers or at indieboogie. And when are you doing a new review, Evil? Do you know?
very soon, very
Very
soon. I'm
soon.
working on it right
Great.
now, hoping to get it
Well,
out in a few days.
uh, I highly suggest you go check out the reviews you do because they're pretty awesome. They're very in depth and they're quite funny.
Oh,
So then, shall we decide right now when we do the next show? Like that sounds reasonable,
well, I just wanted to do this one because we hadn't, been on in so long.
right?
I think the day we had proposed was like Thursday, and I just said let's do one day earlier so we can get done. I guess we can just start up on Sunday again or Monday, whichever.
That sounds good to me. So then you can find us back on Sunday. We'll let everybody know what the new topic will be as soon as we know. And yeah, just come and join us. Ask your questions on Twitter or YouTube, and we'll discuss them. And we'll see you on Sunday.
Perfect.